Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first out of a series of international openEHR events provided by the openEHR Netherlands. As many of you know, openEHR is an open standard specification for storing, managing, searching, and sharing social and healthcare data. And we're going to dive into a few basics today, together with a practical use case coming from Slovenia and Italy. And that's basically what's going to happen in the next hour. My name is Tjaša Zajc. I'm the host of Faces of Digital Health podcast, and I'm also a business developer for Better. To not lose any more time, first, a very warm welcome to our three speakers. Mr. Marcel Svenenhaus from the openEHR Netherlands. He's going to have the first presentation. And then we've got two clinicians with us here. Professor Dr. Tadej Avčin, coming from the University Medical Center in Ljubljana, and Professor Dr. Andrea Taddeo, coming from the University of Trieste in Italy. And now, please, Marcel, the word is yours to start with a brief overview of the use of openEHR in the Netherlands and details about general things related to openEHR.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Marcel Svenenhaus. For those who don't know me, very quick background in healthcare IT for a number of years, and there's a lot of familiar faces in the audience. I've been active also in open system, especially in the medical and the documents area. And since 2 years, I'm part of the openEHR Foundation in Holland that we erected together with Wouter and Sebastian. And we are trying to promote the knowledge and use of openEHR in the Dutch healthcare market. I want to give a very quick introduction. Some people will know a lot about openEHR and probably a lot more than I do, but there may be people that don't. So I want to give a quick introduction also on the background of the Dutch market. If we look right now in the Dutch healthcare IT market, we see quite a lot of vendor lock-in with closed systems, especially in hospitals, but also in the primary care market. So we have a lot of information silos, separate systems, and there is a lot of copying data, and there's a lot of efforts to improve that, but over the past years, not much has improved in reality. And it's, in our opinion, also blocking innovation at this point in time. There's even an authority in Holland. It's called the ACM, the Authority for Competition in the Market, that's looking into this because they also realize that something is not going right. And we hope to get a conclusion from them in about 2 months, and let's see what's happening there. Within the foundation, we have started writing up a manifesto of what we believe is the direction that we're going. I'm not going to explain them in details, but we think that things should be done a little bit different than what's being done in Holland right now. For instance, the second one, we see that in Holland there's a lot of copying and exchanging information from one system to another. Therefore, you have duplications, and we think it's much better to get good access to the source of the data instead of copying everything. That's just one example. So we prefer the access over all of the exchanges that we currently see happening. One of the nice statements that we like in that sense is what Rachel Dunscombe has said, that data is for life, not just for one system. And that's a little bit the problem that we see in Holland, that there is no access to the data. It's just the supplier that has access to it. Again, coming back to my history, open data, if you don't do it, you lose data, you have to migrate data over time when you go to a new system. And for medical images and documents, that has been resolved. I just happen to be pretty active in the vendor-neutral archiving market, and that's an open standard, and people can connect any application to it if they want. And XDS, etc., has the same. However, at least in Holland, for the EMR market, that has not happened. And we think we should resolve that too. And we believe that having a structured open data approach with things like openEHR could resolve that. For those who don't know, what is openEHR? Well, that's an open international standard for reading and writing medical records, electronic medical records, based on a lot of clinical models which have been defined by healthcare providers, so not by the technicians. And there is a worldwide reference model that can be used to do that. It's really growing in the world right now. I see some people from Finland also here. They know that this is happening really hot there. In Spain, there is activity, but there's a lot happening in the world right now, and we want to stimulate that in the Dutch market. openEHR is also an open competitive market. There are a lot of platform suppliers, for instance, and that makes it good. And we actually have a couple of those platform suppliers in Holland, like Code24 and NADAP. So I think there is a lot of opportunity to develop this market further in the Dutch market. Like I said, clinical models, very important part of the medical, of the openEHR system. This is an example of a blood pressure. These things are defined on a global scale, and you can apply them with so-called templates so that a GP can use the same clinical model as a cardiologist for blood pressure, for instance, but they will use different versions or views from that same clinical model. Clinical models go further than just data. It also goes into the entire clinical process. And like I said, there is a global database. The clinical knowledge management is open. Everybody can access it. You can download the models and you can use them in your system. So that is available. Why is this important? Well, also for the Dutch market, we have something that looks like it. We call them ZIBs, Zorginformatiebouwstenen. So that's Dutch for healthcare information building blocks. And the foundation is currently working on making sure that the openEHR clinical models and the building blocks, the ZIBs, are mapped in the right way. That's one of the activities that we're doing within the foundation. Of course, there are APIs available that you can use, and these are standardized. So there's for each of the platform suppliers, you can still use the same APIs to work with it. Just to give people a bit of an idea what can be developed, there are people that have developed dashboards for EMRs. There is closed-loop medication available. There's lab data possibilities. There's order management. There are patient portals, e-health measurements. Those are things that are all available. You can use Apple tools, growth charts. So this is not something which is starting. There's a lot of applications, etc., available. Care plans are being used. So we see a lot of possibilities. And that's why we are trying to promote that. So in the end, we hope in Holland to get an openEHR ecosystem where there's much more freedom of choice for applications for the healthcare providers, better innovation, freedom of choice of your platform, etc. So that's the goal. And that's what we're trying to achieve with all the lectures and stimulating the knowledge around this program. Then a final remark for the Dutch people here. We will have our annual openEHR conference in Houten in about 3 weeks from now, where we will have people from Spain presenting, from Catalonia, where openEHR has been selected. HIMED will be there. We'll have our Dutch suppliers there. And that's where we'll also talk about the relationship between FHIR and openEHR. And I think the announcement is out. So if people want to register, you can do that right now at Eventbrite. That was what I wanted to tell this morning.
Thank you, Marcel. We're going to have some time at the end for questions and answers. So I suggest that we move to the second stage of the event. Also, given that we have a very international audience here, thank you everyone for sharing where you're coming from. Also, feel free to share any experiences with others that you already have with openEHR, any concerns you have regarding the standard. Let's make most of this event for connecting to best knowledge sources. And now the second part of this event is going to be a short discussion about the Cattedra project, which is a cross-border cooperation between the university in Trieste and the medical center in Ljubljana. So I would like to again give a warm welcome to Professor Dr. Tadej Ocin, who is the head of the Department of Allergology, Rheumatology and Clinical Immunology at the University Children's Hospital in Ljubljana. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation.
Welcome. And our second speaker is Professor Dr. Andrea Tadio, who is the assistant professor at the Institute of Child and Maternal Health at the University of Trieste. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Let's first start with a brief understanding of the project and its significance in the clinical sense. Professor Ocin, the European definition of a rare disease is a disease that affects not more than 1 person in 2,000 people. And you've been in the clinical practice for over 25 years by now. You're the head of the Department of Allergology, Rheumatology and Clinical Immunology since 2009. So can you just explain in a general sense, how big of a population are we talking about in your case of rare disease patients? How has the research about the rare diseases changed throughout your clinical time?
Yes, so thank you for the question. I'm a clinician. I'm pediatric rheumatologist and immunologist. The most common disease among pediatric rheumatic diseases is juvenile idiopathic arthritis, with incidence approximately 1 per 1,000 children, which means that our most common disease in pediatric rheumatology practice is already a rare disease classified. So we see per year approximately 50 new patients with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and at our center that is covering the population of 2 million, Slovenian population of 2 million, we are kind of in our registry, we have approximately 500 patients with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So this is the most common pediatric rheumatic disease. And then we have several other diseases that we see, for example, 1 or 2 cases per year. And on the extreme end are diseases where we would see only maybe 1 or 2 cases in our, let's say, whole career. So I would say that from our perspective, rare diseases, single disease is rare, but if we group them together, we see more and more rare diseases. And then I sometimes, let's say, explain to our younger colleagues that there are so many rare diseases that each one of us has 1 or 2 diseases. So if we group all these patients together, the number is huge. But of course, because these patients are rare, somehow it is difficult to group them together and perform any significant research. What changed in the last, let's say, decade or 2 in the follow-up of rare diseases? So the first thing is that rare diseases are more and more recognized. There is specific research in early diagnosis of rare diseases. And since we know better pathophysiology and pathogenesis of these rare diseases, we have also more and more targeted treatments for specific rare diseases. So we do expect that in the future years, there will be even more specific targeted treatments for these rare patients, and that we would have even better diagnostic techniques to recognize them.
Professor Tadio, because the number of patients with rare diseases is low, collaboration between different research and medical centers is important for high enough numbers of patients and samples that can then be researched on. So can you tell us just a little bit about how has the collaboration and just cooperation between the 2 centers started? How has it been developing even before the Cattedra project?
Yes, so thank you for a question. So the Trieste Center and the Ljubljana Center has been having a long time collaboration in the last 10-15 years. But of course, we just had some collaborations on some specific clinical research topics. And so when we decided we had the opportunity to apply for a UA grant, the first step, of course, is to invite some colleagues which you have, a good collaboration and that well. And because the first step, of course, is let's say the sharing of the same clinical diagnostic tools and the same clinical, care of patients. And then when you have, another group of clinicians with the same research clinical topics, then you can try to have some more partners that may help you to build and to build an European project. So then we found better, of course. Actually, the colleagues from Ljubljana, asked for a better application in the Cattedra project, and then we found some other partners which are involved in, let's say, technical lab test buildings, which are innovative and hopefully helpful for diagnosis of these rare immunological diseases.
Thank you. If we move to registries now, so 4 registries have been created throughout the Cattedra project. And Professor Dr. Aucin, can you explain a little bit about how is data gathering happening when we're talking about the rare disease research? How have you done it so far? How does the data exchange happen? And what is now different with the registries that you have?
Yes, so together with colleagues from Trieste, we decided that we will build registries for 4 among the most common pediatric rheumatic diseases. So we build up a registry for juvenile idiopathic arthritis, juvenile dermatomyositis, childhood onset systemic lupus erythematosus, and autoinflammatory diseases. Characteristics of pediatric rheumatic diseases is that we do not have one single pathognomonic test that would be somehow test for establishing the diagnosis, and we also do not have a single test that we could follow during, let's say, the follow-up of the disease to somehow judge the activity of the disease and response to treatment, like, for example, the level of glucose for a patient with diabetes or blood pressure measurement for somebody with high blood pressure. So for pediatric rheumatic diseases, we need a complex clinical and laboratory set of investigations to somehow follow and assess disease activity and effectiveness of treatment. If it is okay, I can share my screen to show you the data, how actually these registries look. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just a second. I will stop sharing because it is not moving forward. I will go to the first slide and start again. Okay, so with the registry, we wanted to build up a robust clinical registry. Can you see my slide? Because can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes, we can see. Yeah.
Because I cannot see. Strange.
So we have the first slide, yeah.
Okay, now, so this is the first slide. So we wanted to build a robust registry where we would enter the crucial clinical and laboratory data. And with this data, we would like to somehow build a database that could be somehow followed during long term for 10 years, for 20 years. With this data, we would then be also able to somehow calculate the disease activity, disease severity, and disease damage over time. And with this, to somehow follow how our patients are doing during time. So this is the basic scheme how we are entering the number of active joints in our registry. We wanted to build a registry that is user-friendly for busy clinician, so that we could easily enter the clinical data. And this is the scheme how we are entering, just clicking the number of active joints. And these are some of the summary slides where we would like to, where we actually could choose which of the laboratory parameters we would like to follow. This somehow set of data includes some laboratory data, some clinical data, such as number of active joints, and we can include in this set also some of the calculated scores that are automatically calculated from our registry. So this is the, let's say, the screenshot for one of our patients with juvenile dermatomyositis. Again, we choose some of the clinical data, and the data from a score, which is CMAS, is a score, childhood myositis activity score. And with this score, we would like to somehow follow how this patient's disease activity was over the disease course. In addition, we somehow wanted to include data for the medications, so which medications the patient was taking, so that we could easily somehow assess how was the effectiveness of certain medication. What was the beauty with this, or somehow what we expect over a long time we would like to see with this registry, that it is able to compare data from different clinical centers. So we are entering our data from Ljubljana in a form where we could see the name of a patient, but the colleagues from Trieste could see anonymized data from our center, so that we could somehow compare data of a single disease from two centers. And of course, we are expecting that this will be available in a larger network to somehow compare our clinical and laboratory data over time.
If I'm not mistaken, there's over 30 clinical forms that were created for the four registries. So maybe Professor Tadiu, can you talk a little bit more about, the meaning of data and data gathering? How were these clinical forms designed? How did the work for that look like? And how did it look before you digitized the whole process? You're on mute.
Okay. Okay. So this was yes. We have a lot of clinical let's say tools for these four registries. What is important to underline is, of course, that the registries do not modify your everyday clinical practice, but of course, it is a very helpful tool for every clinicians dealing with this kind of patients, right? So what we have done in these past months with today with colleagues from Ljubljana was a very hard work with Better in trying to build, let's say, the registries as we intended, as we wanted, in order to, they could be helpful for our purpose. Of course, before these registries, of course, this is something that we usually do in our everyday clinical practice, but we usually use, paper sheets and something like this because we don't have any other opportunity to put, let's say, in an online web registry all the data that we collect, and of course. Let's say the best objective, the main aim of our collaborations is to have, let's say, a sort of long-lasting follow-up of these patients during time, because this is let's say the hardest part of our work. So to have, let's say, a picture of our patients during time, because every time you should, check the clinical charts and go back and see back what happened 6 months before, 1 year before, and so on. And a clinical registry may helpful, maybe a good help for you to easily see, to easily understand how is going this patient, and to compare and to see. For instance, our group of patients, our subgroup of patients here from Trieste, comparing them with other group of patients coming from the Slovenian team, for instance.
Thank you. Professor Aucin, do you want to elaborate anything else regarding how, what's the clinical significance of this project? Because in essence, this was a research project, so how does it translate into clinical practice?
Well, I would like to see that, when we started to collect our patients, I think that the biggest benefit will be in years to come. That 5 years from now, my colleagues or myself or some younger colleagues in 10, 20 years would be able to look back at the systematically collected clinical and laboratory data and would be able to retrieve information on the follow-up of our patients. Of course, we are using this registry also as a kind of a database for grouping our patients. But the biggest somehow benefit is that the registry was specifically designed by clinicians for clinicians, so that all the, let's say, the scoring systems for disease activity and disease damage are automatically calculated through the database.
And how much did you already do any comparisons, or do you already have any plans or research projects outlined regarding what you could do with the data that you're gathering just now?
Well, some of the epidemiological projects we already are performing, so we are doing, but in the future, particularly we would like to perform some clinically oriented studies to see the diagnostic process and to see the therapeutic response and use of different treatments among our two centers. And of course, we would like to somehow expand this registry also regionally and also internationally.
Okay.
How to say? This is the platform. This is the basement of a house. Without basement, you cannot build anything up. And the registry is for nowadays, for any somehow diagnostic or therapeutic research, you need a good registry database.
Before we continue, I still have a few questions, but I would like to just invite the audience to write any questions that you might already have. We're going to have some time for that after this discussion. But just, if anything is on your mind, either related to the presentation we had at the beginning about openEHR Netherlands or openEHR in general, or the specific use case, do let us know in the chat and we'll go through those questions in the end. Now, Professor Taddeo, when it comes to data gathering and introducing digital IT tools to research or clinical practice, what was the most difficult part for you? Generally speaking, nobody is too excited when you say IT, especially the way EHRs look today, with a lot of manual data input and a lot of initial time that needs to be invested for the benefit that comes later when you have the data gathered and you can actually do research in a more convenient manner than on paper.
Yes. So the best, the worst part is of course the time is every time you do something, you lost your time, right? So, and since the time of our clinicians and of researchers is never enough, and so if you want to put some clinical data in a new registry, of course, this is a sort of time, it could be considered a sort of time-consuming work, right? So you waste your time putting some data into registry, but of course, since in this case we are trying to, we are doing this during our the everyday visits. And so we are trying to not to waste our time, because in this case, the clinical database, the clinical registries is something that we usually do in our everyday visits, in our everyday clinical activity. So the time we consume doing this is quite small at the time. And in the future, the data that we are going to collect might be very helpful, as Tadej already said, in the following years. Might be very helpful to better understand the pathogenesis, the etiologies, and also, let's say, the outcomes of this disease, which can be, harmful in children. So I would say that the worst let's say vision of the clinical database would be considered the time. The time that someone has to lose to put some clinical data into the registries.
Professor Aucin, what was your experience, and how many doctors from the University Medical Center were included in the whole preparation of clinical forms and just the whole process in the project?
So from our side, there were clinicians and also laboratory colleagues involved, because the registry is somehow including both clinical and laboratory data. From clinical point of view, I would say that the most difficult part was that as doctors, we need to somehow learn how to put our clinical data in a structured way into the registry. So we need to somehow change the mind how the doctors should somehow classify their clinical data in the registry. So this was, I would say, not so difficult task. I would say that one of the most challenging tasks is how to combine and include laboratory data. From technical point of view, of course, this is probably not so difficult as it is from a methodological point of view, because different labs are using different laboratory techniques and are expressing data with different units. So even within, let's say, a single medical center, we would have certain laboratory examinations performed at different places and with different expression of units, and this even somehow could exaggerate among different centers. So this was one of the important tasks. There are also different laboratory information systems that needs to be integrated. I think that this is one of the challenges and room for improvement for networking on a, let's say, European-wide level, if we would like to even have somehow better cooperation in the future. So both clinical and lab data needs to be structured and comparable between centers.
This is a question for both of you, what was kind of your biggest learning out of this whole project, and also, getting into the IT space with the clinical background? Professor Taddeo, perhaps you want to start.
Yes. So what we learn is that there's a lot of work actually to build, clinical registry for this purpose, and this is maybe something. I think that I can also talk as per today. And at the beginning, we were shocked a little bit, which was the difficulties that we at the beginning had in trying to have, let's say, to get the solutions that we needed from the IT company, because of course there are some clinicals and, let's say, needings from researchers, from clinicians, and on the other side there are some technical difficulties from the IT team, right? So what I learned is that there is a lot of work and there is a lot of negotiation to have, in order to have a good, a product of good quality and with the needing, it can work as you intended, as you wanted. So, but it was very helpful, I think, for us to understand as a clinical database work and all the steps that you need to go through to have at the end a final product.
Thank you, Professor Aucin.
Yes, thank you. So I would say that for us, this was absolutely an opportunity to work with the IT team and see how they are thinking. I would say a challenge for us as clinicians was that certain scoring systems, for example, for lupus, that we are used to fill from a clinical point of view, it was very difficult to put in an IT format because we have some qualitative, some quantitative expressions, and to put in a structured form was quite a task. Probably it took a little bit longer time than we expected, but now I would say that we are quite happy with the product, and definitely there is more time for clinician because you have to enter certain data. What we would like to, and we try to somehow organize that as much as possible, we need to think as clinicians to enter data in a structured format. So we need to change our somehow perspective, how we are storing our medical data. And if we are entering data in a structured format, it could be then in the future transformed, modified, compared, and so on. And the other challenge that I already mentioned was somehow that we would like to have automatic integration with different laboratory information systems. With some systems, we already were able to manage this integration, but not all of them. So this is also a challenge for the future.
Okay, thank you. Given that we have quite a few questions in the chat, I suggest that we move to those. So Marcel, maybe if you can also turn on your camera and unmute yourself for some of the upcoming questions. At the same time, good. So everyone that's here, maybe you can also ask the question on your own. So Ellen, could you maybe unmute yourself? Your question was regarding the relation to openEHR to the research. If not, then I'll just read out the question. So the question was, how did openEHR contribute to this research? And is the research database based on the archetypes? Who wants to go with that one? Hi, Ellen.
Hi. We are with the group here, so Nasca will ask him this question.
Yes.
Yes. Well, it's the same like you already read it out. Like how did openEHR contribute to this whole research?
So maybe this is the answer should be given by one of the better IT specialists. From a clinical point of view, I can say that this is not just a research database. We would like that this database would be used in everyday clinical practice, so that this is part of the routine clinical practice and comparable between different centers.
Okay, we do have so Andrzej Droz, who's the head of business development at Better, is also here. So maybe, do you want to add anything related, apart from the fact that, you know, openEHR is a data specification that helps with just comparison of the data once you put it together?
Yeah, hi everyone. So the solution is built on openEHR, that's correct. And the benefit here is that these archetypes are obviously then also published on the community and available for everyone else to use, so that if similar registries somewhere else would be created using these archetypes, the data from those could then be combined and compared with the data from our colleagues in Italy and Slovenia. And more of these registries that are set up, not necessarily by the same, let's say, IT solution on top, as long as the data is stored in the same way, then you're getting richer and richer set of data points for these conditions across the Europe. So that would be the benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Gerard asked what specific archetypes have been developed. Should we just maybe answer that later and direct the list of archetypes that were done?
What?
Andrzej.
Sorry.
So the other question was a little bit more specific about archetypes, more specifically what kind of archetypes have been developed and contributed to the openEHR CKM. So do we want to list them, or should we just follow up with them later?
Yeah, we can send a list of all the archetypes and templates that were created and used. It's a quite extensive list, and I don't have it at hand at this point, but we can definitely share with whoever is interested in this. Okay,
maybe you can just add your email to the chat so we can follow up on that one. The next question that we have is, how are the forms for data collection integrated with the electronic health record that clinicians use in their day-to-day work? Maybe Professor Aucin, do you want to elaborate on that one? Is this even connected, given that this is a registry?
Yeah, so first I would like to say it depends how is your electronic health records organized. For example, up to now, I would say that we have a good clinical information system, but our health data are not entered in a structured format. We have, kind of a free text for clinic notes or hospital discharge letters, so they are not in a structured format. So that's why the most specific clinical records needs to be entered into the registry, and that's why it took somehow a long time that we were developing for pediatric rheumatology adapted clinical care forms that are essential for a long-term follow-up. There is integration for a part of the laboratory information system from our children's hospital, so this is somehow integrated, and we do hope that there will be even further integrations with other laboratory information systems. So for the future, I think that it is crucial that within the electronic health records, we somehow enter the classified, the structured data, like, for example, joint count and other clinical data.
Ruud, do you want to add anything, any follow-up questions? This was your question.
Yeah, no, not actually, it's a good answer. And the reason I'm asking is that you try to avoid that you somehow put a burden of double registration at the shoulders of clinicians. So you try to somehow make them complementary. And in the Netherlands, we're really looking to where we do have quite some EMR systems who are advanced and capable to register structured data, but for these rare diseases, it's often a data set which is more enhanced than we register in our program health record, and that's why it would be very nice. And I've seen that in Karolinska, where they try to somehow make pathways where there is an enhanced data set for some rare diseases that they put in a regional database, such as you created now based on openEHR, and where they integrate the forms in the day-to-day EMR system, so that clinicians can register the additional data for that care pathway in such a database directly, and it's not registered in the EMR. So that's a little bit what we're looking for. That would be a model that would fit.
Thank you for that insight. We have quite a few additional questions. So the next one is again from Professor Aucin. Hamza, do you want to maybe explain a little bit more what you meant with the question about this data working as a data passport for further research? If you're still with us.
Yeah, of course. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, my question is about the data passport because Professor said about collecting the data from different laboratories, and as we know all, each laboratory have a different standard or different units. So my question is, after collecting these laboratory data from different laboratories to a centralized system. So do he means that is this all data collection for data passport for different further researchers, for healthcare practitioners, or what is the actually plan for this collection in centralized system or centralized data standards? That's my question. Thank you.
So this is a good question, and it's a, let's say, unexplored field. For certain laboratory tests that are simple and everybody uses the same methods, it is easy to somehow integrate. But for certain, let's say, more specific immunological tests, you will have certain labs that are used to certain methodology of performing this lab test, and they will not change this methodology because this is their, for example, traditional method that they are developing. And in more specific, more let's say subspecialty field you are moving, there will be more and more such a, let's say, of these specific immunological laboratory test results that you would like to, of course, integrate in your system. So there needs to be a certain flexibility. We managed together with Trieste to somehow find the core laboratory tests that we would like to integrate, and for certain that would take, let's say, too much time, effort, and would somehow slow the project development. We somehow leave the open field that they could be entered in a descriptive format. So this was kind of a compromise that needs to be taken in a search, in such a development. On a Europe based, I can say that, you know, methods from different labs could be different, and it would be very difficult to integrate. What we also had, let's say, within our hospital, we had several kind of meetings with different hospital labs that we integrate the data from patients, also regarding the ethical issues, because this is somehow the data that are within the hospital, because we are using the full name for the in-hospital use of the registry, and it is acceptable if these data are then in an anonymized form available, let's say, in collaboration with the Trieste Center. But these are all issues that in a such a registry needs to be somehow be aware of and to be considered.
Okay, thank you.
The next question was also from Ruth, so maybe this is also for Marcel. What do you expect from the European Health Data Space Initiative? And Professor Olcin and Professor Taddeo, do you see any hope in the whole idea about the European Health Data Space and maybe expanding the Cattedra project in that sense?
Well, I can go. So what I wanted to say is that we need to be realistic. There will be different clinical databases within Europe and around the world. What would be ideal that these databases could compare their data, no matter who was the developer of this database, so that we could somehow have a structured view. For example, if we would say, okay, so let's compare juvenile idiopathic arthritis patients from Ljubljana, Trieste with colleagues from Utrecht. Utrecht has an excellent pediatric rheumatology center, and they also have a certain database, PharmaChild database with the data. And in Genova, in Italy, there is another large database, and I know that the Francophone community has also their database of patients with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And when we are performing European projects, up to now, we were kind of re-entering the data from certain databases. And from a clinical point of view, we would somehow like to develop a robust clinical and laboratory set of measures. And what we expect from IT community, that you could somehow find a solution how these structured data from different databases could be somehow compared in an openEHR or in some electronic format that there is no need to re-entering the data. I think that in the future, this will be a giant step for let's say, advancement of medical community.
Maybe Professor Taddeo, you can follow up a little bit on this. Earlier you talked about how much negotiation is needed when it comes to developing the models, developing the forms, how much collaboration is needed. And in that sense, I wonder, how do you see that scaling could happen among medical centers? What would need to happen? You are all working internationally with other clinical centers. So what are the chances that, you know, you would as clinicians unite around what's needed, so then something could be designed to cater those needs.
Yes, as they already said, actually, so there are several international databases all over the world. So we have one more. Now there's one more. But what is very important to understand is that maybe, you know, some centers, for some reasons, do not apply for some, let's say, international clinical centers for, you know, different reasons. And what happens, what may happen is, for instance, some Eastern centers may be more prone to be invited and to apply to our, for instance, to our clinical database. So our database might probably, or hopefully, let's say hopefully, become bigger, because we can include, for some geographical you know, position, to include some other centers from, for instance, Eastern countries. And then, of course, the main goal would be to put all the different clinical data that are collected all around the world in a sort of super pool of patients of the same disease, in order to try to compare them, but also to have bigger cohorts, and from which to get to have some, you know, informations on clinical manifestations, treatment outcomes, and so on. So this is a very big issue, of course, because there are some different, you know, there are some differences in clinical manifestation, in clinical data that are collected among different clinical databases, and also there are some difference in how the different clinical databases were built. So, of course, this is a sort of negotiation between clinicians, researchers, and IT team group. But this, of course, would be, let's say, the best outcome, the best goal that we should try to get in the future.
Thank you. Joost asked a question about the use of openEHR structured data in a day-to-day follow-up for individual patients. Maybe, Joost, do you want to just elaborate further on your own?
Yes, so I wondered, Professor, you told us that most of the data in your current EHR is unstructured data, it's free text. So how much, if you enter the structured data into the better openEHR software, how much duplication is there? And do you also use the structured data for single patient follow-up to review, like the progress, disease progress, clinical decisions, stuff like that? Thank you for answering.
So the current health information system, for clinical information system in our hospital, is designed for a general patient, let's say general pediatric patient. So it's a descriptive information, whatever disease the patient has. And this clinical database is specifically developed for pediatric rheumatic disease patients. So it's definitely more information that we are, let's say, up to now, we are dictating or typing within the clinical letter note, but this is a specific rheumatology-based clinical database. So it has more information. It will take a little bit more time now that we are getting more and more used. It's, let's say, less and less time, and it's kind of a doable within a reasonable time scale, and in particular, looking at the benefits that this database is providing. And how our future goal is that, for example, when we will transfer these patients to the adult rheumatology care, when the patient will turn 18 years old, we will just print the note from our Cattedra database, how this patient was doing over time. We will not, copy 50 clinic letter notes from the current clinical information system, but somehow the structured format within Cattedra will provide an excellent summary what actually happened with this patient during this period of time. So it's kind of upgrading the current clinical information system.
Okay, so thank you. So if I understand well, it's not just the values, not in the research of the registry, that's also valuable for the day-to-day clinical care and for transfers of care. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, the good clinical research work is good clinical care management, right? So I think that this is somehow goes hand in hand. If you would like to have a good clinical practice, you need to compare your practice with the international community.
We had one more clarification, a question that I think we can take on in the last 3 minutes. Alexander was asking for an additional clarification about how was the database populated. We talked a little bit about that, but maybe you can explain that again. Alexander, do you want to just add anything to the question?
Thank you. No, not specifically. By everything I heard, it sounded like stuff was re-entered, but maybe I missed the point where you explained how things were added in a more automated way somehow. It sounded like the barrier between what your EHR can do today and what you needed in your database was too high, but maybe I missed the point somewhere.
If I may just explain, so at one stage, you need to enter data, clinical data needs to be entered by physician, either within the clinical information system or the Cattedra database. So from a clinician point of view, I mean, whichever clinician you will ask, we would like to enter data only once for a single visit. And we would like that this would be somehow, you know, transferred to all the different local or international measures. And from our point of view, from Ljubljana point of view, our primary kind of a database where we are now entering the clinical data is the Cattedra registry. So because up to now, we only had the clinic notes, and these clinic notes were not so well structured. But at one stage, you need to manually enter the clinical assessment, the clinician's assessment. You need to manually enter in a structured way in a certain electronic format.
I think with that we can close the discussion for today. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to all the speakers that shared their insights and took time to answer the questions that we got. As far as the audience goes, thank you everyone for joining. We will create a follow-up email, maybe with some additional information. Eric also suggested that we do a post at the openEHR discussion forum about archetypes, so I'm sure we can address that too. And you know, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out and we can explain things further. But for now, have a lovely rest of the day, everyone. And I think we will also have a recording available if anybody wants to see this discussion again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.